Hello and welcome to episode 496 of the Yellow Pod. It's an emergency episode. I'm your host, Stefan Butzko, and today we will talk about Nuri Şahin getting sacked as Borussia Dortmund crater in 2025 with the fourth defeat out of 4 games. I'm joined by Lars Pollmann to discuss all that. Mike Tulberg taking over as interim coach and whatnot. Good morning, Lars. In my case, it's not even 8 a.m. yet, and I'm still relatively tired, but it is an emergency episode time, so here we are. Lars, how are you doing?
It sounds like I'm doing better than you, Stefan, because you sounded like, I don't know, they shot JFK again or something. Quite somber tones from you, which I'm not accustomed to, but I'm doing fine-ish. I mean, it's definitely not a day to celebrate. When a good man loses his job, I think for all of our criticism towards Nuri Şahin and, the decision to give him the title of head coach, I think we can also acknowledge that it's a sad occasion when that project falters so spectacularly that he's out of a job within, 7 months or so. It's not a great day.
No, it really isn't. And I must say, I've hardly felt more hopeless about the situation in a very long time. I don't recall ever feeling this hopeless about Borussia Dortmund, simply because when Dortmund were as hopeless as they are now, I was simply too young to care as much or feel that way, because I don't know. As a kid, you always feel like they'll figure it out eventually because you know about the previous successes, but right now I feel like Dortmund are a bit of a trajectory like Hamburg or Schalke, where things are just going to spiral from here on out with like the lack of income from Champions League money and whatnot, and then you have to downsize the squad and you cycle through coaches while the decision makers are not getting upgraded and the decision makers at other clubs are just superior. And so the demise feels like it's on the horizon. Anyway, that being said, I don't know in what direction you want to go first, Lars. Do you want to talk about potential replacements first, or do you want to talk about the elements and the reasons for this firing first? I feel like you can choose your direction for now.
I mean, I would suppose the chronological order makes more sense.
All right, then go ahead. Why do you think Nuri Şahin failed at Borussia Dortmund, and do you think that Nuri Şahin's sacking is the right call?
I don't think there's any arguing that it's not the right call. Like, I don't think even Nuri Şahin pretty much knew his time was up. I mean, seeing him, in the press conference and TV interviews after the defeat in Bologna, looked very much a defeated man, knowing that his final chance had gone away. So the sacking is entirely justifiable. I mean, they've won one of the last 9 games. That was away to Wolfsburg, which almost got out of hand in the second half, despite being up by 3 goals. We've talked at length about, Leverkusen, Kiel, and now Frankfurt. And I think you could easily make the case that Bologna was the worst game of them all, because there was just nothing in it for Dortmund. I mean, they got a fairly lucky penalty call, I would say, because if that's a penalty for Waldemar Anton, then I think Bologna should have gotten one for, was it Endoy against Groß? Pretty much more or less the same, thing. But Dortmund got the penalty. Guirassy almost squandered it in a fairly arrogant manner. I mean, when you score penalties, I guess you're always right, but that was closer than it needed to be in that situation. But I don't think that anyone was under the impression that this was suddenly the big turnaround for Dortmund, and And the very few people who might have felt like this was the point of, maybe things will get better from here on out, they were quickly proven wrong, because that was such an abject performance. There was no urgency. I seem to recall there being 3 shots in like the official match statistics, but I couldn't tell you which was the third one between, the penalty and the one shot from distance from Gio Reyna.
I think it was the header from Girassi that went over the bar.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense. But not an actual, super high scoring chance. And on the other side, Bologna with very simple methods carved up Dortmund, especially in the second half, time and time again. Could easily have conceded 2 or 3 more goals in the final few minutes. I think the writing was very much on the wall, and I think if we take a macro level view on Nuri Şahin's short-lived tenure at Dortmund, he was basically set up to fail because he was the least prepared head coach Dortmund have had in a long time, if not ever, given arguably the worst squad in years. Now I think there's a bit of a chicken and egg situation, because we don't want to be hypocritical, so we have to acknowledge that in the summer we were quite happy with the transfer business they made. I think we talked about it last time, that I understood each and every one of their signings, and I gave my approval to them, if that means anything to anyone. So I can't sit here and say, well, all the players are shit and there's no quality, and Şahin had nothing to work with. So I think, as I said, there might be a case to be made that another coach can get more out of this squad, but it's certainly not, or it doesn't have the absolute high performers. There's no Erling Haaland, no Jude Bellingham, and there's also no Marco Reus and Mats Hummels. And I think, looking back, it seems fairly obvious that they underestimated the impact that those two leaving would have, even though especially Reus didn't have too much of a sporting role for much of last season. And Hummels was much better in the Champions League than in the Bundesliga, but just having the veteran presence in the dressing room, I think probably we know now that it made more of a difference than we were maybe willing to realize in the summer. So you could argue Nuri Şahin was set up to fail, but as we've talked about so often, he should never have gotten a job, in my opinion. And I think this delayed sacking, which inarguably, in my opinion, should have happened much sooner. I mean, we were talking about it last week. End of October, the collapse against Real Madrid, there were too many terrible away performances. Lucky wins in the Champions League at home to mediocre opposition like Sturm Graz. I don't think at any point during these months you could have pointed to Nuri Şahin being a viable long-term solution for Dortmund. And obviously sacking him doesn't solve all the problems, or even only one of the biggest problems, but it doesn't mean that you can't sack him, because you have to take care of what you can take care of. And seeing as you can't replace, 10, 15 players in one transfer window, especially not during the winter, you had to make almost the sacrificial choice of sacking your head coach, because that's one thing you can change relatively quickly.
Yeah, that's exactly right. Sky Sports Germany made the graphic of the points per games average of the recent head coaches. I mean, obviously, the list is long, but Nuri Şahin in the end was at 1.48. So he is beating Peter Bosch, who was at 1.25, but he is not beating Peter Stöger, who was at 1.58. Edin Terzic in his first tenure at Dortmund was at 2 points per game. And in the second tenure, he was at 1.93, Marc Rose at 1.85, Lucien Favre at 2.01, and Thomas Tuchel at 2.12. So that sort of gives you a bit of context of how bad Nuri Şahin's tenure was at Borussia Dortmund, and I think it was the FootMob app that I saw yesterday with a screenshot shared that the expected goals created from open play for Borussia Dortmund was 0.03 yesterday. I personally also do not recall Dortmund registering a shot after Bologna made it 2-1. And that really just sums up in what of state this Borussia Dortmund team is. It was the first win in the Champions League for Bologna ever, if I'm not mistaken, or at least this season. And
it's the first season, so.
Yeah. So there you go. And Borussia Dortmund just had nothing to answer what Bologna were doing, and I think I just read a piece from Dirk Krampe, but I don't even need Dirk Krampe to tell me it, because the team just looks unfit right now, and I think this is something you could also put on the doorstep of the coach. The team does not look like they have the energy to fight in games like this. I mean, we can talk about the gesture of players running over to Nuri Şahin after they scored the penalty. But honestly, there was just nothing there in the end. It's just total collapse, really. Nuri Şahin tried a lot of things in the last 4 games. I think he had different tactical approaches more or less every time. I mean, the Leverkusen game you can sort of rule out because, with all the... it was a flu game, really, and there was not much left. But, he didn't start Emre Can or Julian Brandt for his end game, if you will. But I think we've discussed this here before often enough. When you give a coach an ultimate game to play, then I think it's already over, because that already means you don't have a long-term trust in him if it comes down to one single sporting result, because football is a low-scoring game, and even if you could play well and still lose. In this case, I think the performance matched the result, however. But yeah, now we're looking here at a smoldering Dortmund. I mean, Mike Tolberg is taking over, but really, I feel like the dominant feeling, at least in my view, is that there is not really a contingency plan yet. The fact that we have had competing stories about who is talking to Dortmund, be it Roger Schmidt, Ten Hag, maybe now Kovac, who knows, but there are competing leaks in the press. There are leaks to the press about all the infighting that is going on within the team. I don't know if Sebastian Kehl is accusing Mislintat via Sportbild about overstepping his boundaries again. I feel like I've read something along those lines, but I always just read it via poorly translated aggregators, so I'm not entirely sure what's going on. But Lars, maybe you can enlighten me. But to me, at least, it feels like everyone has sort of lost the plot and is more busy with saving their own butt than really putting Dortmund first.
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to mix up my metaphors or whatever, but kind of has a late days of the Roman Republic vibe. There's just total dysfunction, chaos. As you alluded to, I think it's fairly safe to say that there are competing factions within Dortmund's hierarchy, leaking stuff to different media outlets, which is how you end up with one side saying there's no way Erik Ten Hag is even being considered for head coach, and another side saying, well, he's still very much an option, but I think the consensus is now that he's not going to take over immediately anywhere. I mean, he's only been let go by Man United at the end of October, so most coaches not named Steffen Baumgart usually take a bit more of a gardening leave, as it were. So I think we all understand, we've talked about this enough so that we don't have to, dwell on it too much, that sacking Nuri Şahin is only papering over some cracks, and the biggest fissures are within, the higher echelons of Dortmund's decision-making stage. I think always going back to the well with players, from way back when and trying to replicate successes they've had under Jurgen Klopp with different kinds of people, personalities. At some point, there has to be sort of a big crush, and maybe that's what they are heading towards, because if anyone at Dortmund actually thinks that all it takes for them to be successful again is to appoint one good head coach, I think they are in for a rude awakening, because I don't know how many head coaches in world football I would trust to be successful long-term at Dortmund under the current setup. I'm sure there are many who could get more out of the squad and maybe even, make it back into the Champions League spots in the Bundesliga, which isn't actually, completely out of the question. I mean, given how poor Leipzig are doing, let's say Frankfurt don't find a replacement for Mamouche. The second half of the Bundesliga season is 1 game old, so there's still quite a few points to be had, obviously. So,
but Stuttgart and Frankfurt just look, they're miles ahead right now. I'm sorry.
But who's to say? The point I'm trying to make is, even if they do that, that would still not mean that everything's all well in Dortmund again. I mean, I don't know who's going to be the interim manager after Tulberg, who's clearly only a placeholder for Bremen and maybe also for Donetsk next week. Whoever comes in then, let's say they have a complete turnaround in this season for whatever reason, that still wouldn't mean that Dortmund can just continue doing the same old stuff they've been doing. I mean, we talked at length about Sebastian Kehl's contract extension. I'm quite soft on Kehl as opposed to a lot of other people, but I also agree that he shouldn't have gotten his extension, and that the signal it sends, especially when it happens immediately before the worst stretch of results in 24 or 25 years. That's not a great signal to send. Giving the most responsibilities to Lars Ricken, who's a novice in this job, also not a great signal. I think almost the worst thing that has happened around Dortmund in the last 24 hours is Matthias Sammer being super arrogant as a TV expert analysis, whatever role for German Amazon, who have the TV rights for some Champions League games, and him acting like he's completely void of any level of responsibility for what's happening at Dortmund. He completely eviscerated the team, rightfully so, in terms of performances, obviously, but I mean, Matthias, mate, you were part of the decision-making process for a lot of the stuff that you are now criticizing. So
it's literally the guy in a hot dog costume asking or looking for the guy who did this, you know?
So just the entire management structure needs to be overhauled. I think as I said, we've talked about this, and we will continue to talk about it, because there's not going to be that level of change right now. I think there's a chance, especially now that Şahin is gone, that Kehl has to leave in the summer as well. I think it makes no sense switching sporting directors during a transfer window in which Dortmund have presumably laid some groundwork to transfers. I'm not sure. given that it's January the 22nd and there's no particularly strong links to anyone. But in the summer, I think there has to be more change. They cannot believe one new head coach and a few signings in the squad will make all the difference, because that's clearly not the case. Because if that were the case, then at some point they would have been successful over the last few years, because that they have tried. What they haven't tried is bringing in actual outside influence and people with decision-making responsibilities who haven't slept in Dortmund bed sheets for their entire life or played at Dortmund for, a decade or so.
Yeah, but who's going to make these decisions in this? Are you trusting the people making these decisions even to make the right decision, because at this point it feels like whoever is responsible right now at Dortmund, be it Watzke, be it Ricken, be it Kehl, I feel like every time anyone makes any decision, we're just worse off 5 minutes later. So I'll be honest, my trust in Lars Ricken guiding us through this situation as the CEO of sport is very minimal. Watzke is basically out the door, but is still pulling the strings, and he's not pulling them well whatsoever. And Sebastian Kehl and Sven Mislintat apparently are butting heads about the club's direction too. So yeah, I'll be honest, it's really looking bleak right now, and they need to find a new head coach now, be it for half a season or more longer term. Presumably both, because it feels like the model is to give someone a half-season contract for now and then look for a new head coach next summer going forward. But I'll be honest, I have very little confidence of the turnaround everyone is talking about actually happening. I mean, surprise me, I guess, but right now I do not have the confidence that the decision-making capability of the cleansing or self-cleansing or whatever you want to call it, and the basically restart higher up at Dortmund headquarters. I'm not seeing it happening, honestly. I think it's going to be more of the same somehow. So yeah, I guess in the meantime we can talk about potential new head coaches. So waking up, the prime candidate seems to be Niko Kovac. Lars, from all the names that's been floating around, who would be your pick? Not that you get to choose, but who would it be and why?
I mean, I've also been a Dortmund fan my entire life, so I'm clearly qualified for a leading role. And I've also coached youth football, which makes me almost as qualified as some of the coaches they have acquired over the last few months. Can I say anyone but Niko Kovac? Is that a fair answer? Because that, to me, reeks of desperation. I mean, obviously Kovac won, I think, even the double at Bayern, and he's also been successful at Frankfurt, but the way his tenure at Bayern fizzled out, to be polite, I mean, he completely lost the dressing room. He picked a fight with Thomas Müller, of all people, who's like the patron saint of Bayern Munich. And then also his time at Wolfsburg was quite poor performances, results, and also his public persona. I don't necessarily understand why there's an infatuation at Dortmund with Kovac, who was a candidate before. I think it seems like the kind of guy that Sammer and Watzke would be pulling for, because he was, a player with a strong mentality and a midfield worker, and that seems to be something that appeals to them. I think the only positive you can say about Niko Kovac is that he isn't one of those Dortmund retreads. And obviously he has a level of experience, but...
I mean, his brother played for Dortmund.
Yeah. So ein Wörns und so ein Kovac, ne? I mean, it's just a bleak outlook if Niko Kovac is the best a team can do that was in the Champions League final, 9 months ago. The one positive would be that there could not possibly be any view of appointing Kovac for longer than until the end of the season in sort of a Peter Stöger type deal, and then trying to find someone better unless Kovac blows you out of the water, which I don't think is necessarily likely. I think if if that constellation would be the case, then that would, to me, clearly point out a very concrete interest in Sebastian Hoeneß of VfB Stuttgart, because he has a release clause in the summer, which you can exercise. It has been reported until the end of April. but also is only valid for clubs who are in Europe next season, which I can't really reconcile how those two things can be this case, because unless you are winning the league by April, you don't really know if you are going to play in Europe next season. So that doesn't really make sense to me, but nevertheless, I think Hoeneß is also very much the obvious candidate for all German clubs who need a coach, whether that be Leverkusen because Xabi Alonso might go to Real Madrid, but whether that's Leipzig because Marco Rose is not all that. He was also like a fallback option at Bayern, I'm sure. He would be the obvious candidate for Dortmund, but I don't know if that's necessarily likely, because quite honestly, if Stuttgart make it into the Champions League again, why would you leave them for Dortmund and be the next Stuttgart to Dortmund pipeline guy, who has to fear for his life when they play in Swabia next? So I don't know if that's likely. So if your question is what would I do, as we talked about last week, I don't think Erik ten Hag is a bad coach just because he didn't cut it at Manchester United. I think that's a club that kills people, or kills people's careers, I should say. And I've always been somewhat taken to Roger Schmidt, but that's not a likely option, so I don't know. If the question is, do I want Niko Kovac and then Sebastian Hoeneß, you could definitely get my approval for that, just because of how good Hoeneß is. I don't know, as I said, how likely that is. And if the question was Kovac and let's see, then I would argue you might as well just stick with Mike Tulberg, because he knows the players already and his style seems to be more suited to, pro football than youth football.
Well, I mean, at BBB Newsblog 3 hours ago tweeted that Matthias Sammer feels ready for bigger tasks, apparently quoting Bild. I'm not entirely sure what this means, but Lars, I have to ask, is there a snowball's chance in hell that Matthias Sammer will take over as Dortmund head coach in, I don't know, a week's time?
I mean, isn't it snowing in Texas right now? Is that close enough to the snowball's
Florida,
chance
yes.
in hell?
Yeah.
I mean, the thing is that Sammer had a very nasty health scare a few years back and has basically ruled out going into any sort of role that would require him to do daily work, like his TV jobs and what he does at Dortmund as an advisor. That's not something that he has to spend too much time day in, day out on. So I mean, stranger things have happened always, but something also has to be the strangest thing that ever happened, and nothing stranger can happen. So I would put the chances of Matthias Sammer being Dortmund head coach below 1%.
All right. Yeah, good. Honestly, that would just be hysterical at this point.
I mean, to be honest, I would like to see it just from an entertainment value.
Yeah, I understand.
And honestly, I don't think he would do a worse job than Mike Tulberg long term or Niko Kovac. I mean, I cannot understand or overstate how little I think of Niko Kovac. So
yeah, I think you have made that clear, and I'll be honest, I feel like whoever Dortmund have lined up is probably not going to really do well. I mean, Florian Plettenberg literally 30 seconds ago reported that Roger Schmidt is not available for Borussia Dortmund at this time, and I think we need to talk about the news pouring through that coaches like Roger Schmidt are not interested in taking over as head coach for Borussia Dortmund due to the front office setup or whatever you want to call it. But yeah, it seems like quite a mess, honestly, and I don't blame anyone who doesn't want to coach Dortmund right now, because A, Dortmund are cycling through coaches, and B, it is absolute turmoil here, and you do not feel like as a coach he will really be able to, make any long-term achievements it will probably not help your career. So my imagination that Sebastian Hoeneß will be on Dortmund's sideline next season is not there right now. I just don't see it happening. I think we'll go through more mediocre coaches, and I think Niko Kovac would be the perfect candidate to take over now in what I've described earlier, Dortmund's I don't know if it will end up in the second Bundesliga like Schalke or Hamburg, but definitely their demise to, I don't know, Bundesliga midfield for the foreseeable future, because I don't think there's going to be a quick turnaround this time. And also, I just want to reiterate that as we end the show soon, I really don't think that just sacking Nuri Şahin is doing enough. I honestly feel that Sebastian Kehl and or Mislintat also should go, just for all the bullshit I've been reading in various Bild articles recently. I think it's enough. It's unprofessional, and it is not Dortmund-like. I mean, just to say it, but in the times under Zorc, I'm sure there were some disagreements within the club too, but at least in the better parts, Dortmund journalists were surprised by transfers because nothing leaked out, and I would very much return to those days and not know about lineups 3 or 4 hours before games and other opinions of people working in higher echelons of Borussia Dortmund. So yeah, I think it's all pretty fucked. I don't know what Mike Tolberg is now going to do against Werder Bremen. I can only hope that Dortmund somehow pull out a win, but like I said before, they do not seem fit enough right now. So Bremen might just outrun them and win because of effort, and I do not want to hear the boos and whistles that will result if Dortmund do not play well in that game. So really not an easy situation whatsoever. I don't know if you want to talk about the lack of leadership within the team right now, because it doesn't feel like anyone is stepping up. The team sort of turning their backs after the defeat to Frankfurt, led by Emre Can, where they wanted to approach the fans but then didn't. It all feels like it's falling apart right now, and this is where we are. So I don't feel like this is going to be the last emergency podcast, if you will, and this season feels pretty much FUBAR. Lars, do you have any other musings before we knock it on the head? Because I don't feel like doing deep dives about Erik ten Hag or other potential coaching hires right now, because I think we can just discuss this when it happens in a week or whenever that is.
Yeah, I don't expect them to take too long. I think we might actually get an answer on the coaching question before the Bremen game, and then the new head coach being in the stands, but not having taken over, because it doesn't make sense with the lack of training time. I would push back a little bit against this narrative that they are destined to be the new Schalke and HSV. I mean, there's obviously the saying "too big to fail" was tested during like financial crashes and that stuff, but I think the situation is at least financially quite stable. Even if they miss out on the Champions League, there's the Club World Cup this season. And I think we also have to acknowledge that outside of Bayern and currently Leverkusen, but who's to say that they are going to be on top still when and not if Alonso and Wirtz leave. The rest of the Bundesliga is unlikely to ever be completely out of reach for Dortmund, just because of where they are as a club. The stadium is a big draw. They have a large academy. They will always have a bit of a draw for players. I don't subscribe to the theory that Dortmund are doomed for the foreseeable, even if this season is, as you said, feels basically over already. The new manager bounce, I don't know if there's any statistical analysis on how real that is in football these days, but
I don't know. We have felt it often enough, I feel like, that Dortmund faced a new manager and lost.
If nothing else, this works as, taking away every alibi from players. You can't, for example, let's say Marcel Sabitzer, he's been outspoken about being unhappy with his role at the start of the season, and he's barely played him for the last few weeks. He now has to deliver, and I think such a player knows that. And I think quite a few players should show a reaction. I don't know if they will, if they have the capacity right now. As you said a few times during the show, and I think that's been underreported even over the last few weeks, is just how bad Dortmund look physically. And to an extent, that's understandable given, injuries and illnesses over the season so far. But it seems to me like that's one of the more egregious mistakes they've made under this coaching team, which, by the way, we only know about Şahin leaving. I don't know if Łukasz Piszczek is going to be around still beyond this time, because obviously he didn't come necessarily with Şahin from Antalyaspor or whatever. But they clearly didn't do enough, groundwork physically to be in a good position right now. And obviously losing against Bologna means that Dortmund are very likely to have 2 additional games in February before the round of 16 in the Champions League, which is the worst thing that could have happened from that game, because they need every day on the training pitch with a new coach, and especially given how bad they look physically, the two extra games against presumably a good opponent, because some of the bigger teams are struggling in the Champions League this season. So all in all, it's hard to be positive about anything at Dortmund, but I wouldn't go as far as saying, they are destined for eternal mediocrity again. I will put my hand out and say I believe in the theory that some clubs are too big to fail. And the difference, for example, to Manchester United is that the opposition in the Bundesliga is just not as strong as in the Premier League. So a club like Dortmund, with all the resources, they only need to get so many decisions right to get back into contention, not necessarily with Bayern, obviously, but with the rest of the league. So I wouldn't be as negative as some people, but I guess that's also understandable given the product on the pitch, and also, the behavior of the pitch, as you alluded to, with all the leaks in media and stuff.
Yeah, I mean, in my head, it's just like, I used to try to open these Bild Plus articles to read about Schalke's downfall, and now it feels like less fun when I read all these intrigues and whatnot about Borussia Dortmund. It's just really not fun. So this is just the vibe I'm getting from this club right now. It is very much rudderless. And also it's also just funny that at this moment Dortmund have not managed to find a replacement for Daniel Malen yet. I think the transfer window is still open until February 3rd or so. But the fact that really nothing has happened to address any of the issues in the squad so far also is not instilling any confidence in me. But I guess doing nothing could still be better than signing the wrong guy. So maybe there's that. But yeah, I don't know. I hope, Lars, you're right that Dortmund right the ship eventually. But I'll be honest, I'm really pessimistic right now, and it does feel very bleak to me because I have no confidence into the leadership at Dortmund to get it right. And when things spiral in sport, we've seen it often enough, they spiral just quite severely. So anyway, we'll talk to you all next week about Borussia Dortmund's state of affairs. Lars, thank you very much for taking the time to talk to me about this nonsense, and hopefully Dortmund can pull out a win somehow against Bremen and Shakhtar Donetsk. Anyway, as always, thank you for listening. Until next time, goodbye.